In furthering tensions with China, the United States is reportedly set to send bombers, 6 B-52 bombers, to northern Australia in an effort that would honestly provoke even more conflict with China at a time when clearly we don't need it, China doesn't need it, the international community doesn't need it. But military contractors absolutely love it. So I should note that these B-52 bombers that will be sent over to northern Australia would have the capacity, the capability to also carry nuclear weapons, although we're hearing from both the Australian government and the United States government that they will not be armed with such weapons, at least for now. But they would be located close enough to strike China, which is why this is such a huge problem. An investigation by Four Corners, that's a show over in Australia, can reveal Washington is planning to build dedicated facilities for the giant aircraft at Tyndall Air Base in South Darwin. The US has drawn up detailed plans for what it calls a squadron operations facility for use during the Northern Territory dry season, an adjoining maintenance center and a parking area for 6 B-52s. Now, since the Obama administration and his so-called pivot to Asia, the United States has been ratcheting up tensions with China. And that has led to, in my opinion, an intentional arms race between China and the countries surrounding China that we are sending our military weaponry to. Now, there's also a lot of frustration among the military contractors based here in the United States who have noticed that some of those weapons manufacturers in China have turned out to be a bit of a competition for us. So an arms race is economically beneficial for these companies, and it's something that you should keep in mind. Now, Becca Wasser, who is from the Center for New American Security, admits that this tactic is in fact meant to be sending a big warning to China. Having bombers that could range and potentially attack mainland China could be very important in sending a signal to China that any of its actions over Taiwan could also expand further. Meaning if they do anything that's even remotely hostile toward Taiwan, if they indicate in any way that they plan on, challenging the, I guess, somewhat of an autonomy that Taiwan has at the moment, well then, of course, we'll have the United States expand military capability in that region, including in countries like Australia. Now, the bombers aren't the only part of this arms race. There have been investments in other defense assets in Northern Australia, including the expansion of the so-called Pine Gap Intelligence Base, which of course they're using to kind of keep an eye on China. The intelligence base would also play a pivotal role in conflict with Beijing. And in a statement to the show Four Corners in Australia, the US Air Force said this, and keep in mind, they're being very transparent about what they're up to. Okay, they're not hiding anything here. The ability to deploy US Air Force bombers to Australia sends a strong message to adversaries about our ability to project lethal air power. How is this helping the situation, our relationship with China? I don't really understand why we continue ratcheting up tensions with a country that, of course, we are intertwined with, economically speaking, a country that we would need cooperation with when it comes to, I don't know, important things happening in the world like the climate emergency. But now that we're wrapping up the so-called war on terror in the Middle East, I mean, all of these economic assets, they gotta find someplace else to operate, right? And that's really what Obama's pivot to Asia was about. This isn't something that started under the Biden administration or the Trump administration. It really started under the Obama administration. And part of the fears had to do with, of course, China's rapid rise economically, but more importantly, the concerns that weapons manufacturers have had in the United States in regard to some of the competition they're seeing among manufacturers in China. But regardless of what the motivations are here, it's very clear that it is irresponsible for the United States military, the State Department, the US government to continue increasing tensions with China. Now, there's more to this. Some are concerned that it will make Australia a potential target for the Chinese government. Richard Tanter, who's a senior research associate at the Nautilus Institute, says this: "It's a great expansion of Australian commitment to the United States war plan with China. It's a sign to the Chinese that we are willing to be the tip of the spear. It's very hard to think of a more open commitment that we could make, a more open signal to the Chinese that we are going along with American planning for a war with China." And guess what? China happens to agree. In a recent statement made by their foreign ministry, they make clear that these actions are sending a clear message to China in regard to a potential conflict, a potential hot war with the United States. Let's watch.
The relevant US behaviours have increased regional tensions, seriously undermined regional peace and stability, and may trigger an arms race in the region. China urges the parties concerned to abandon the outdated Cold War and zero-sum mentality and narrow-minded geopolitical thinking, and do something conducive to regional peace and enhance mutual trust between countries.
Kind of hard to enhance mutual trust when you're sending B-52 bombers that have the capacity to carry nuclear weapons to northern Australia, knowing full well that they are within range to strike the Chinese mainland. I mean, that is as hostile an act as you could possibly engage in. And we are spending money on this already. In fact, when it comes to this specific effort to send these B-52s over to Northern Australia, in April, the US Department of Defense budgeted $14.4 million for the squadron operations and maintenance facilities at Tyndall. The squadron operations facility is required to support strategic operations and to run multiple 15-day training exercises during the Northern Territory dry season for deployed B-52 squadrons, the US documents say. And of course, those military exercises are considered provocative as well. But of course, we're gonna ramp that up in Australia, along with the deployment of these B-52 bombers. Now, the buildup is making some nervous, again, that Northern Australia could be a potential target for China. But one MP, Madeleine King, says it's totally fine because these military investments, they create jobs. Let's watch.
That build-up with those B-52s at the Tyndall Air Base in Katherine is not the only build-up of US forces in this region. Of course, we've seen the Marines rotating through here since 2012. And also, there's been plans announced for the United States to build a fuel storage facility in Darwin Harbour. Madeleine King, the Minister for Northern Australia, has been asked whether this build-up of defence assets should have people here in the Northern Territory worried that they're becoming a target for a potential attack from a foreign power. Here's what she had to say.
There's been a lot of investment in Darwin and towns that host aircraft right across this country, but particularly in the Northern Territory. And that's welcome investment. It's good for the communities. It's good for jobs in those areas. The indirect jobs that come with having Defence Force people there, I do not think it increases the risk to those communities.
Yeah, I mean, I guess ratcheting up war between two superpowers could be beneficial to your economy. The fact that you see people in positions of power in various governments, I mean, that is an MP in Australia, rallying in support for war efforts because it might be economically beneficial. Kind of insane, right? Especially when you consider that we're talking about B-52 bombers that can carry nuclear weapons that can cause the complete and utter destruction of entire countries. But this is just the smooth brain thinking that we see from these politicians. without thinking ahead, without thinking about maybe some of the unintended consequences, thinking about how this could completely tank the global economy, considering just the critical nature of China within our global economy. It's just the short-term thinking and the obsession with war profiteering in Western countries, countries aligned with Western countries. It's just complete and utter destruction. It's so stupid. And to see this happening with absolutely no real critical analysis in our media tells you everything you need to know. I guarantee you we're getting closer and closer to a potential hot war with China, because all of these irresponsible efforts are taking place without Americans even knowing about it. All of this money, tens of millions of dollars already in regard to what we're doing with Northern Australia right now, being allocated without Americans even being informed about that. There's no debate, there's no question about it. There's no critical thinking. And there's also this insane realignment that I'm noticing in the United States that makes me incredibly uncomfortable and increasingly politically homeless. I remember feeling like the left really resonated with me. I mean, broadly speaking, the left, I'm not just talking about leftists. Back in 2003, right before we invaded Iraq in this preemptive war, I remember knowing, all right, one political party clearly wants to, raise some alarm over a preemptive war, even though there was widespread support for invading Iraq. And one political party, the neocons in the Republican Party specifically, wanted to invade no matter what. Now I don't know where I fall politically, because I'm seeing progressives all of a sudden take this innocuous, harmless letter politely asking Joe Biden to maybe try diplomacy with Ukraine and Russia instead of automatically sending more weaponry and tens of billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. Maybe also try some diplomatic approaches here. The fact that progressives took that letter and retracted it after they got a little bit of backlash from hawkish members of Congress blows my mind. I mean, the cowardly nature of that is infuriating. Seeing progressive commentators online and in the media also bang war drums is incredibly disturbing. It's one thing to be critical of any individual who says, no, we shouldn't assist Ukraine. We should just leave them to fend for themselves. No one said that. Not a single progressive who signed onto that letter said that. But the idea that you would have a negative knee-jerk reaction to the suggestion that, hey, in addition to sending all this aid, maybe we should do what we can to bolster peace negotiations. The fact that anyone is outraged about that on the left is so incredibly disturbing. So I don't know where I belong, really, because we should be pushing for any and all efforts necessary to avoid more lives being lost and more money being spent on these wars that drag on for years and years and kill countless people, innocent civilians. You can dislike Russia all you want. You can have deep concerns and issues with China and the way it treats its people, the way it's treated Uygur Muslims. Those criticisms I agree with. But at the same time, you can also take a look at what's before us and understand that pushing for more conflict, more war, does more harm than good. The only people who seem to ever benefit from it are the individuals who have private businesses that profit from war. And I think that's the direction we're headed in right now with China. And it's terrifying, especially since the media, by and large, is completely asleep at the wheel. We have to rely on Australian press to know what our government is up to. It's disgusting. And please spare me your DMs or your tweets or your messages about how bad China is and how wrong you think I am. I've seen your bio, you work at the Atlantic Council, go kick rocks, not interested. Sick of seeing our taxpayer money go to this garbage over and over again.